My name is Emily Weber. I'm a machine learning specialist at Amazon Web Services, and this is your deep dive. So today, we're going to talk about Amazon SageMaker Studio. So as a quick recap, it's important to understand that there are three ways that we think about building machine learning services at Amazon Web Services. That starts at the lowest level, right, where we're looking at frameworks and interfaces for our infrastructure. But then we're going to take a step above that and look at our automatically managed infrastructure at the ML services layer, and then a step above that is the AI services layer, which encompasses generally pre-trained models and managed science. And in our content here today, we're going to take a look at that middle layer of the stack. And so you might be thinking, there are so many moving parts in a real machine learning project. I mean, there are Jupyter notebooks, there's all these, different pieces that are in different places, and how do we easily bring those together in one place? And so the answer here is Amazon SageMaker Studio. So Amazon SageMaker Studio starts with you, right? Starts with the customer. And so let's assume that you're a data scientist, you're a developer, and you have a laptop, right? And where do we go from there? So after that, SageMaker Studio is going to let you enable either IAM or single sign-on or SSO to get into your Studio environment, as we call it, your domain. Studio is going to come with fast notebook startup. So that means that after Studio has been created, the notebooks are going to turn on very, very quickly, so that when you get into your environment, you'll be able to have those notebooks come online well inside of 3 minutes. And generally, Studio provides a consolidated experience. So the different components of your typical machine learning flow are going to be brought together via SageMaker Studio. And your IDE, here we're going to call this a domain. So Studio has a concept of a domain. That's really the general environment, but that's not the infrastructure. That's actually the IDE level. So that's the experience. And that's going to provide low lift or automatic feature access to many of the new features that were launched in SageMaker back in December of 2019. And so that's going to include autopilot, experiments, debugger, model monitor, versioning, and endpoint management. And in particular, the thing to remember here is that all of those features are backwards compatible, which is to say you can use normal SageMaker notebook instances and absolutely still get access to those features. It's just that using them is actually going to be easier on Studio because they're all going to be right at your fingertips. And then lastly over here, we're going to have the EC2 instances, and that's the compute that you're actually going to be leveraging. And so what's happening here is that Studio is actually decoupling the environment that you are browsing in, so your IDE, from the compute that you're actually leveraging to run your content in. And so this is helpful so that, of course, we can scale those two things separately and actually build more features for you around those in a separate manner. And so we're going to be able to create a shareable link with our package dependencies in a single click. And the billing here is per usage, not uptime. So the billing, again, is going to be per when you're running that compute rather than when the compute is actually on. And we're going to be able to change environments per project. So when you turn on a new, or when you open up a new notebook, you're going to get a different environment for that notebook. So that you can manage your dependencies for that separately. So this is Studio. This is just a little quick screenshot here. So over on the left-hand side, these are icons, right? So the folder here, that refers to your data. That's where your data is actually sitting. This is a Git branching solution so that you can monitor the different branches that you have and the stages in those branches. This little circle here, those are for your environments. So you can look at the Jupyter environments you have from notebooks through to terminal environments as well. The palette here is for some additional gears. The little beaker, this is for experiments. A couple other gears here, and this is for endpoint monitoring in addition to some other capabilities. And so one-click notebook sharing. So Studio is going to default to having a one-to-one user-to-instance mapping, which is to say you're going to have one domain in your account, actually. So one domain in your per AWS account at this point in time. And what's going to happen is that for all of the additional users that you want to get into that domain, you're going to create a user profile. And for that user profile, you'll specify obviously who the person is and then how they're connected to your AWS resources. Again, either through IAM-based policies or through SSO, which obviously is going to also use IAM-based policies, but the user experience is more through your single sign-on. All of those users are going to be connected to a single domain, actually, so one domain. The difference is that each person will actually only see the code that they're writing. So they're only going to be looking at their EC2 instance that's hosting their notebooks. If and when these folks want to share, either when they're in the same domain or even when they're in the same organization, then we're going to be able to create that shareable content with a single click. Actually, there's a little camera icon that we'll be clicking to create these shareable snapshots. And so remember the setup here is IAM based or single sign-on. And again, we're looking at one domain per AWS account. And so when we want to delete that domain, we just need to make sure that we're deleting the users first and then the entire domain. So let's check it out. So this is Studio as it's already set up, but I'd actually like to show you how to set this up. So we're going to go up here. And then we're going to cruise over here. You'll note that I'm at the SageMaker service. You can get to that by going up here to services, and then in this bar, just go ahead and type in SageMaker. All right, so now we're in SageMaker. So let's cruise up here, top left-hand side to SageMaker Studio. Almost like that. And then down here, let's look at this Getting Started tab here. A couple options. So you can just choose the Quick Start. That's going to move a lot faster and give you fewer options. But if you want to drill down, let's look at Standard Setup. And so Standard Setup has, again, two options. You've got AWS SSO or the AIM access. In this case, we'd actually prefer to just look at SSO. And that's because in this account specifically, not necessarily this organization, but this account, I have an SSO instance already set up, and that's in USE, so that's in the same region. You'll definitely want to make sure that you follow this, that your SSO instance needs to actually be set up in the same region as your Studio domain at this point in time. So we'll close that out here because we got that set up. Let's go down to permissions. And under permissions, if you have already created a SageMaker execution role, these are going to pre-populate. If you have not done that, go ahead and up here, click create a new role. And then let's make sure we're selecting any S3 bucket. That'll give you a little bit more access there. Then we're going to hit create a role. But if you need to drill this down, obviously select that button. We're going to create this role, and there we go. And so you'll note that this execution role is actually related to the date, right? It starts here with the year 2020, and then 04 for April, and then 03 for the date. It's a good practice to make sure you're using up-to-date execution roles. That's because the services are launching new features, and the execution roles, when they're more recent, they will cover those additional permissions that we need. And so let's make sure that we're using this latest execution role. Down here, a couple more options. So notebook sharing. So we can enable notebook resource sharing. This is going to use a default S3 location. We can disable that if we like to, but I'm going to make sure that that's enabled. And then we're going to have an option for encrypting that if we prefer. Under network and storage, we can specify the VPC, but actually the domain is going to ask us to pick this in a second. So we'll just handle that on the next tab here. Let's open this up. There we go. So we'll pick a VPC in addition to subnets. And let's hit save and continue. All right, and that's it. So this will take a few minutes for Studio to come online. And the expectation with Studio is that it will be actually created by an administrator, and then the administrator will help the data science and developer user base onboard to Studio, but we're not expecting that that user base is going to need to wrangle the AWS console nearly as heavily as with the notebook instances. So this is why the two aspects have been really separated out. I'm going to cruise over to a previous instance of Studio that I already have set up. So remember this folder up here icon, that refers to our data. And so typically that's going to be notebooks. You can have some data volumes here, but just remember on the notebook instances, you can actually increase those at this point in time. So if you have a larger data volume, just make sure you're actually on the notebook instances rather than Studio. But we still want to check out Studio because there's a lot going on here. So when Studio comes online, you will not see this many repositories or data volumes. You're actually going to need to git clone that onto your domain. So when you're doing that, make sure you cruise out to the SageMaker examples. Those are hosted on GitHub. This is going to have over 250 example notebooks that demonstrate using SageMaker for a variety of capacities. So we're going to want to make sure that we have this cloned. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, cruise over here, and then let's check this out. So let's say I want to go down here under environments. So these are the running environments that I have, but let's say I want to create a new one. So I'm going to hit this plus sign here and a couple different options. So these are the containers that are going to be leveraged for those EC2 instances. If you're not sure what you want to do, then pick the data science one actually. The data science image is going to have more credentials set up for you, so Boto 3 and some of your other creds, so we'll want to make sure we pick that. Then we also have options for MXNet, PyTorch, and TensorFlow. If you want more environments out of the box, then check out the SageMaker notebook instances. Those have a huge variety of environments already set up. And if you want more details on that, those details are over here. Right? So they're actually hosted on GitHub. So there we go. We'll cruise back here. So let's go with that data science template. And then a couple options. So we can create a notebook, we can create an interactive shell, or we can create a terminal. And that's what I'm going to do here. So hit terminal, and there we go. So let's check this out here. So you'll note that we're in this root directory. You are going to see root quite a bit in the Studio environment. Let's drop an ls there, and you'll see that so this root directory is actually one level above all of these. So that's directly where these are hosted. So if I make a test directory, and then over here on the left-hand side, let's say I hit refresh. There we go. That shows up right here. And so in this case, I can git clone, right? Just type in git clone, and then just paste in that git link. I already have this cloned, so if I did that, it would actually error out. So I'm going to leave that there, but you'll want to make sure that you're doing that when you set up your Studio environment. And so up here, we have different tabs that are open. Studio is based on Jupyter Lab. And so one of the nice things about Jupyter Lab is that obviously you get all these different tabs open with your notebooks and your terminal environments and your scripts. So you can keep these right over there. Let's cruise over and check out a couple more features. So let's go into the SageMaker examples. I'm going to open this up here, and I'm going to cruise down to SageMaker Debugger. So under Debugger, and then we're going to look at TensorPlot. So TensorPlot is down here. I'm going to open this up. When you want to close out this page here, just click on this sidebar again. So I'll just give that another click, and then this opens up. So I have already run through this example, but let's step through this really briefly here so you get a sense of what's going on. I also really like this example because it comes with a really impressive visualization, and I definitely want to share that with you. So when you're doing this example, you are going to have to pip install quite a few dependencies. I have already done that, so when you're stepping through this, just make sure that you've got those dependencies installed. So first off, we're just establishing our SageMaker session. This should look familiar, and here's some of the new content. So that's SageMaker.debugger. And we're importing what's called a hook config and a collection config, and I'm going to drill into those in an upcoming video. Let's cruise down. So we've got our bucket here. This should look very familiar. Location and bucket, etc. And then here's our SageMaker estimator. Right, so this is obviously an MXNet estimator with our entry point script being specified right here. And there we go. Yeah, and so that is stored just one directory above. Let's grab that. Then we're going to call estimator.fit. There we go. So that's running a training job. Remember, in SageMaker, when we are running training jobs, we're actually turning on new EC2 instances. So we can cruise back over to the SageMaker console in the AWS console to monitor this job. But in this case, we're just going to look at it via Studio. So let's cruise down. So that was training for 73 seconds. After that, we're going to grab our tensors. So the tensors that we got from that job were stored in S3. Then we're going to drop those back. So we're actually copying them using this S3 sync command. So AWS S3 sync, we're copying that from the S3 bucket to our Studio EC2 instance. And so this is an example of what this visualization is going to look like, right? So this is actually an interactive visualization tool that is provided via Debugger and SageMaker Studio. But let's see what it looks like when we run this example. And so this is the visualization that you can actually get, right? We can zoom in, we can zoom out, we can look at specific tensors here, we can really just evaluate exactly how well our model is training. And the net here is really that this can help us actually design a better model, right? Because when we have a better understanding of how the features are passing through the networks, then we can decide if we need another layer, right? We might look at this and think, okay, you know, this looks reasonable, but if the colors were a little bit different, or if it were failing to capture specific elements of the picture, we might consider adding in another layer, removing it. In any case, it just gives us so much more insight about obviously how our model is training. And this is a great way to earn trust with stakeholders, right? If you're working with a business partner who wants to understand a little bit more deeply about, you know, what your deep learning methods are, having this type of visualization that you can quickly pull up is just a great tool to add to your toolkit. And so that's the viz. And there we go. And so all of the rest of the components of Studio I'm going to be drilling into for the rest of this video series. And so if you're interested, I would encourage you to keep watching. So some pro tips on working with SageMaker Studio. Number one, just make sure you remember to clone those Git examples, right? They will not show up exactly the same way you were expecting with possibly the SageMaker notebooks. So just make sure you've got those clones. Second thing you want to keep in mind is that Studio doesn't handle working directories exactly the same way on SageMaker, on the notebook instances. So you want to make sure you're keeping on track of where you are in the operating system. And if you're getting an error on one of the examples, just make sure that you change into the relevant working directory. And another thing you want to know is that a lot of the actions that come with Studio can be enabled just with a right click. So if you're looking at experiments, autopilot, model monitoring, a lot of those capabilities you're actually going to get out of the box just by giving a quick right click. And so with that, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the video. Again, my name is Emily Weber, Machine Learning Specialist at Amazon Web Services. We have a whole host of resources out there. Really encourage you to check those out as you are deepening your SageMaker, your machine learning, and your AWS journey. So with that, take care.